Hello and welcome to Frontline Macroanalysis TV. I'm your host Remmy. Today we are unpacking one of the most volatile flashpoints in South Asia in 2025, the cross-border confrontation between Pakistan and Afghanistan. More specifically, who is funding this conflict, and why is it exploding now? We'll look at historical legacies, militant networks, state actors, regional dynamics, and the current moment. By the end, you'll have a clearer picture of the funding architecture as we know it, and where the grey zones remain. Let's dive in together. First, a quick recap of what's going on. In early October 2025, Pakistan launched airstrikes into Afghan territory, targeting militant sanctuaries and leadership of the Taliban Pakistan, TTP. At the same time, the Afghan side, governed by the Taliban, retaliated with attacks on Pakistani border posts. This conflict occurs along the 2,600 kilometers Durand Line, the porous border between the countries, with overlapping Pashtun communities. Historically, Pakistan's intelligence agency, the Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, cultivated and supported the Afghan Taliban in the 1990s and early 2000s. But post-2021, with the Taliban in power in Afghanistan, Pakistan expected the TTP to be contained. That hasn't happened, and the resurgence of TTP attacks inside Pakistan has provoked Islamabad's retaliation. So, we have a scenario where the old patron-client assumptions are breaking down. And amid this breakdown, we ask, where's the money coming from to fuel this? Let's peel back the layers. Funding for conflict in the AF-PAC border region comes from several overlapping sources. I'll outline the major channels, and then we'll consider region-specific dynamics and the why now. A. Militant financing, non-state actors. TTP and allied militant groups. The TTP uses revenue streams such as extortion, kidnapping, local protection rackets, taxes in tribal areas, cross-border smuggling. These are hard to trace but repeatedly flagged by analysts. State-backed proxies, sanctuary arrangements. Pakistan historically accused Afghanistan of providing safe haven to the TTP, while Afghanistan accused Pakistan of maintaining militant proxies. External donation ideological flows. Some groups receive ideological funding from sympathetic donors abroad. While direct proof in this specific case is limited, past patterns in South Asia show networks of informal hawala, charitable fronts, etc. B. State and strategic funding. G. Pakistan's own security budget. Islamabad has an interest in controlling the border, suppressing insurrection, preserving connectivity. Example, the Uzbekistan-Afghanistan-Pakistan Railway, and protecting the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. While this isn't funding the conflict per se, Pakistan's resources are being directed toward border operations and airstrikes. Afghanistan's Taliban regime. The Taliban's financial position is extremely constrained, international recognition is limited, sanctions remain, and much of the economy is opaque. They are more focused on survival than external aggression, but their tolerance, or inability, to control the TTP within their borders implicates them indirectly in the funding lodging of militants. Regional actors. China. Beijing has an interest in regional stability, especially for its Belt and Road (BRI) projects, and has recently made overtures to Pakistan and Afghanistan on security cooperation. India. India is deeply concerned about Pakistan's security environment. While India is not funding the Pakistani-Afghan border balance to the extent publicly admitted, its infrastructure investments in Afghanistan and strategic rivalry with Pakistan factor into funding flows and regional leverage. Gulf states, UAE. Some reports suggest the UAE and Gulf states have considered relocation of TTP fighters and maybe financial support or resettlement costs. For example, the UAE reportedly funded relocation of 123 TTP families to Ghazni in 2024. US and allies. 500,000 weapons obtained by the Taliban in Afghanistan have been lost, sold, or smuggled to militant groups, sources have told the BBC, with the UN believing that some have fallen into the hands of Al-Qaeda affiliates. The Taliban took control of around 1 million weapons and pieces of military equipment, which had mostly been funded by the US when it regained control of Afghanistan in 2021, according to a former Afghan official who spoke to the BBC anonymously. As the Taliban advanced through Afghanistan in 2021, many Afghan soldiers surrendered or fled, abandoning their weapons and vehicles. Some equipment was simply left behind by US forces. The cache included American-made firearms, such as M4 and M16 rifles, as well as other older weapons in Afghan possession that had been left behind from decades of conflict. The UN stated that Al-Qaeda affiliates, including Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, and Yemen's Ansarullah Movement, were accessing Taliban-captured weapons or buying them on the black market. The best way is the old way. Follow the money and you will unmask who is the perpetrator. See, why now? There are several converging reasons. The 2021 US-NATO withdrawal from Afghanistan left a security vacuum. Militants re-emerged with more freedom. The TTP restarted major operations after initially being negotiated with. Pakistan's economic stress, IMF obligations, inflation, security budget strain, means Islamabad is far less tolerant of recurring militant attacks. Thus funding and operations are being ramped up to address the internal threat. The Taliban government in Kabul is under immense internal pressure, from the economy, humanitarian crisis, legitimacy issues. It lacks resources to control all militant groups, and its previous alignment with Pakistan is less binding. The breakdown of trust means funding dynamics shift. Regionally, infrastructure projects, rail, trade corridors, are becoming more relevant. The AF-Pak border is seen not just as a security zone but as a connectivity zone, Central Asia-Pakistan Sea. Whoever invests in those projects has a stake, which means conflict can be driven or funded to influence those corridors. Funding flows we see, and those we don't. We see, official data shows that the US terminated almost all development aid to Afghanistan in 2025 due to fear of diversion to Taliban terror groups. We don't precisely see full transparency of militant cash flows, hawala networks, state-backed subsidies to proxy groups. That's why much of the who funds this conflict remains hypothesis rather than audited fact. We don't see clearly who funding is. But the old say goes, follow the money, and if we follow the money who see who have interests in the region, US, IMF, NATO usually have fingers all around any conflict in any part of the globe. In the end, we shall see, but we believe that next week in Next Analysis, where we look into global commodity and trade effect, we will start to connect the dots who is likely to benefit from this war. Let's zoom into 3 major case studies which illustrate how funding and interest align in this conflict. 1. The TTP and its sanctuary in Afghanistan. As we mentioned, the TTP uses Afghan border provinces as safe havens. The group's resurgence in late 2024-2025 coincided with attacks inside Pakistan. Analysts at the PIF blog note that the TTP's relocation and rapid escalation of violence signaled external facilitation and host state weakness. In this case, the funding is partially local, extortion, kidnapping, but also enabled by lack of state control and possibly external patronage, making Pakistan view this as an existential threat and justifying cross-border strikes. 2. Pakistan's strategic calculus. Pakistan cannot afford persistent instability on the border, economically, militarily, politically. Its security budget is under strain. Its economic commitments, IMF, debt, are large. The result: Pakistan is deploying significant strategic resources, airstrikes, military operations, diplomatic pressure, to cut off funding and sanctuary for militants. While we may not consider this funding the conflict in the classic sense, Pakistan's involvement escalates the conflict and draws in further funding demands, meaning, for operations, logistics. 3. China's connectivity plus economic interest. China wants a stable Afghanistan-Pakistan corridor for the Belt and Road Initiative, for CPEC, and for its Xinjiang border security. As Reuters reports, China is seeking enhanced security coordination with Pakistan and Afghanistan. Why is this matter? For China to protect its investments and trade routes, the region must be secure. Thus, China has motivation to fund, directly or indirectly, stability efforts, or to mediate funding to ensure militancy is diminished. Conversely, instability can be leveraged by other actors to demand concessions or extract Hence. 4. US, IMF, NATO economic and military strategic interests usually have fingers all around any conflict in any part of the world. Before we wrap up, let's reflect on the implications and reiterate key takeaways. Tie-ins. For regional stability, funding flows to militants destabilize not just Pakistan and Afghanistan, but the whole South Central Asia belt. Especially for infrastructure, trade, connectivity, energy pipelines. For great power competition, China, India, the US, to a lesser extent now, and Gulf states all have stakes. Funding can be a tool of influence or destabilizer. Tie-in. For economics, Pakistan's security burden adds to its economic fragility. Afghanistan's lack of development funding means state capacity is weak, making it easier for militants to obtain funds or safe haven. So, key takeaways are: there is no single funder behind the 2025 Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict. Rather, a mesh of militant financing, state strategic expenditure, and regional strategic interests all intersect. The why now is driven by the post-2021 vacuum in Afghanistan, Pakistan's internal security crisis, evolving regional connectivity projects, and shifting patron-client dynamics. Many funding flows are opaque: hawala systems, remittances, dual-use infrastructure funding, proxy state channels. That opacity is part of the problem. To address the conflict, funding transparency, cross-border surveillance of militant finances, regional diplomatic frameworks, and investment in state capacity in Afghanistan matter just as much as kinetic military use. We also know how shadow corporations and some Leviathan tyrants such as US, NATO, IMF, the World Bank and BlackRock operates. To them, any war is an investment opportunity without considerations to humanitarian disastrous impact or economic destruction. That being said, is this start of conflict signals an end to Ukraine war and a next one on their list flaming up? Thanks for listening to this episode of Frontline Macroanalysis TV. If you found this useful, hit subscribe, leave a comment. What do you think is the biggest hidden funding channel in this war? Next week, we'll turn our attention to the impact of this conflict on global commodity markets and regional energy flows. Until then, stay informed and stay alert together.